This is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast. Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Fitness Wisdom Podcast. Today we have a returning guest, Carrie Bennett. She's the third time on the show, so definitely go and listen to her previous episodes that we've done already. Those were absolutely mind-blowing on the water inside of the body and also the liquid crystalline matrix, the fascial system, and how that literally connects us to the divine. So the network inside of your body is connecting to the network outside of your body. But today we're going to be diving into hormones. We're going to be talking about melatonin specifically and how important that is for our overall health and well-being, performance, and even cancer prevention. But before we even dive into that, I remember reading a post a long time ago on your Instagram. You talked about pH and voltage, and that really piqued my interest because I didn't know that the pH is governed by the voltage. And so maybe you can, and there is also a lot of this idea still out there that people think that an alkaline body, like in general, overall is a good thing, or that we should be drinking like alkaline water or eating an alkaline diet. So maybe we can break that all down and just maybe demystify this area.
Sure. So a lot of what I've learned was spurred on by the work of Jerry Tennant. And what Jerry had said to me was pH and voltage are technically, they're the same thing. They're just described in a different way. Whereas pH is the concentration of hydrogen in a given solution or a tissue or an organ, right? And that's a positive charge. Whereas voltage is more measured in terms of electricity or negative charge. And that negative charge then being able to be in a tissue or to flow. And so, so we, I think, are myopic in the kind of mainstream, not even mainstream, this alternative nutrition, but this alternative nutrition narrative that we must be alkaline. Well, okay, what does that mean in terms of voltage? Well, number one, it means that if we are alkaline, we essentially have an excess of negative charge or electrons, whereas if we are acidic, that is a concentration of protons, and that's a positive charge. So yes, there are certain areas of the body that we need to have alkaline. Absolutely. And I think a lot of what they subscribe to the alkalinity are things like various minerals or, eating this food, not that food. I'm going to talk about how the water, I think, is the main way that we need to view this voltage and therefore pH as well. But it's a misnomer to say that we have to be alkaline or there's that book, Alkalize or Die, right? Because if my stomach was alkaline, I wouldn't be able to digest anything, and I'd likely have H. pylori. If my vaginal canal was alkaline, it would be rife with fungal infections or bacterial vaginosis. So it's each organ itself or each tissue in the body has a unique pH and it needs to maintain. And if it deviates too far in one way or the other, then that can cause issues. Yes, the blood has a slightly alkaline pH, but it's slight. And there's something called metabolic alkalosis, where if you get too alkaline, the body will actually put more acid in the blood, and vice versa if the blood gets too acidic. So it's not this idea that everything alkaline, more alkaline the better. It's no, we need to maintain tissue-specific alkalinity or tissue-specific pH. And then if we break it down even further, it's not just enough to say this tissue has to be a certain pH, because we can get into the interior of cells. And certainly the interior of cells actually need to be alkaline. They have to have a reservoir of negative charge, which we talked about through the lens of water in a previous podcast. But if we go into the mitochondria themselves have a specific area where their proton gradient has built up. It's a highly, quote unquote, acidic portion of the mitochondria that's absolutely essential to maintain for mitochondrial water and energy production. We've got lysosomes that are like the garbage, recycling plants, where you can literally put broken parts into these organelles inside of the cell and break down damaged parts. And if we didn't maintain that very, very specific alkalinity and acidity in the various tissues and in the various cells, the compartments of the cell itself, we wouldn't work, right? We would be expressing some form of symptoms or dis-ease. And so while we say that we need to be alkaline, I would say we need to have the correct voltage and the correct charge in our tissue. So we need to have that balanced charge, and that balanced charge does come from things like water, sunlight on the skin, earthing and grounding. I think that's a really key way that we maintain this voltage. Essentially, we can plug
Mm.
ourselves into Earth's different charges and receive those energies, and they're very balancing. But to say that we need to be alkaline all the time, if I were to drink a big old cup of baking soda water, if it was too much, it could create a lot of dysfunction in my body. So it's
Mm.
just kind of a different way of viewing it that I think is more balanced.
Oh, I love it. And so many people don't actually realize that all the symptoms that you mentioned at the beginning are associated with this change in the charge or the voltage, in depending on the different tissues in the body and how they actually should be a certain way, or because it's clear that, as you mentioned, that every single tissue has to have a certain type of pH, based on its environment, based on its role and its function within the body, right? And it just seems that typically like mucus areas of the body seem to be like more acidic to kill off like pathogens and stuff like that. And areas like deeper inside of the body may be more alkaline, for example. I think. I don't know. Would that be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. You can use acid or a more acidic pH to essentially what the bacteria, for example, that live on our skin, they do like a more acidic pH, and when we have that slightly acidic pH, we're able to harbor the correct microorganisms to create a balanced microbial environment on our skin. And then again, when we deviate one way or the other, we can get fungal infections, or we can get quote unquote opportunistic pathogens and things like that.
So you could even say that the microbiome itself could alter the pH of the skin, and then that could also, or the voltage or the charge of the skin could alter the microbiome, like, this bidirectional relationship.
Exactly. So this may be more than your listeners want to know about, but when I was in undergraduate school, I had to write what was equivalent to a thesis, a master's thesis. And I wrote mine about the changes in the microbiome of the vaginal canal and the different ways that it could deviate. And we found that there were certain instances where if the vaginal canal got too alkaline, that's when the opportunistic infections were able to thrive. Whereas that should be a lactobacillus, like lactobacillus acidophilus, acid right there, acid loving, acid producing bacteria. And if you deviate too far from that, you've essentially given them an environment that they cannot thrive in. So something else is going to take over in its place and start to thrive. And that's where we can get dysbiosis of the vaginal canal.
Light influences every single system of your body, from mood, skin health, cognition, energy levels, gut health, sexual function, training performance, recovery, wound healing, body composition, and so much more. This is why I make sure to block the harmful artificial blue light and expose myself to the beneficial wavelengths of light to optimize my biology. Upgrade your biology today by upgrading your light environment. Head over to emrtech.com/mobilityfitness and use the promo code mobilityfitness for a massive 20% discount at checkout for the best red light therapy panels on the market and the best blue light blocking glasses.
That's fascinating. I mean, it's great that you share this information. It's so important for people to know, because I kind of feel like we always try and suppress this type of information because we feel like it's too much for people to hear. This is like all the stuff that people actually do want to hear because it's not talked about. So it's great that you brought it up. When we actually changed, because I've read before based on Dr. Jerry Tennant's work, he was talking about the voltage and how the cells run on a specific voltage in terms of millivolts, right? Negative millivolts. And when that changes, like we have like disease manifestation. So what does that actually mean? What do you think contributes to that change in the millivolts of the cell?
Well, certainly there's a couple of different things we can look at. Well, this goes into Jerry Pollack's work on exclusion zone water. I truly believe that is the key reservoir of negative charge. And that does require, adequate inputs. So for example, it requires infrared energy. It requires the mitochondria to be able to make that water in the first place. And it requires correct intracellular mineral status, because those minerals really help to hold that charge, anchor that charge. And so that's part of it. But what Jerry talks about is how that charge flows almost through these meridians and organ systems that are kind of stacked together. together.
Mm.
And his original hypothesis, and I mean, I want to make sure I'm quoting him correctly, but I believe his original hypothesis was that flowed through the muscles, like there are these muscle stacks. And certainly muscle can create this piezoelectric charge. But really, I believe that what is funneling charge, that we go back to the more ancient meridian system, which he ultimately recognized then as fascia. And that those coincide, as we talked about before, right? There's an overlap between the flow of energy and the fascial tubes and network to be able to funnel charge. And so I think things like scars, if you have a blockage in that meridian, for some people it is having their teeth pulled or dental infections. You can prevent that charge from flowing. So we've got this body, and we're designed through connecting to the earth and connecting through sunlight to keep our batteries charged throughout all of our cells. And if there happens to be a blockage or a lack of input, that's when you can start to get a drain in your voltage. And as Jerry was saying, that critical level is if you have a cell if you have a cell or tissue that's physically damaged, you need even more voltage to ultimately heal it, because it requires more voltage to create new. Whereas if and then you also need a healthy voltage to maintain and, kind of recycle what's in the cell and repair. And what Jerry Pollack showed was that if you drain to that threshold to a very critical point, you start to get cells that divide uncontrollably and become cancerous.
Wow. That's insane. You just blew my mind there. All right, so let's move into melatonin then, just because we are, on a tight time schedule, but I loved absolutely everything that you said there. Basic question for people who don't know anything about melatonin. What is melatonin?
Sure. So melatonin is a hormone, and it's a hormone that's produced in a couple of different places in the body, and it serves a couple of different roles. One role that I think most people think of when they hear melatonin is it helps us to fall asleep. And certainly that is a portion of what it does, but that's a very small portion of what it does. The vast majority of what melatonin does is it acts as a key repair pathway signaler and a key antioxidant. Meaning it really truly is designed to help our tissues and our cells stay healthy, reduce inflammation, keep our mitochondria healthy. And if we can do that, then we have cells that are thriving and we have tissues that are thriving. But if we're lacking in melatonin, then we run the risk not only of having poor sleep, but at the same, we're not able to then repair our cells while we are asleep, or and we're going to talk about this, I'm certain, repair ourselves during the day as well, because we make melatonin during the day. The vast majority, right, of the melatonin we make is during the day, or it's designed to be. And if we're not doing that, then our cells start to accrue damage and they lack repair mechanisms. They lack mechanisms to essentially remove themselves from a tissue. A cell has a program to remove itself from a tissue called apoptosis. And if that's a dysfunctional cell, and if you can't remove those dysfunctional cells, they can divide uncontrollably and also start to create a cancerous environment. So, melatonin is essential. And I think it's underrated that we assume that all it does is help us fall asleep. And certainly there's a huge supplement market that is kind of portraying that as the main message, whereas I want people to understand that melatonin does so much more.
So let's get into that then. Let's talk about the differences between the external supplemental melatonin versus the body's endogenous production of melatonin. Why do you think supplementation can be harmful, or do you think there is a time and place for it as well? And is it somehow better if it's made by the body or not?
So I think that there can be a time and a place for supplementation, but only in the context of if someone is already doing everything they can to promote their body's own natural production of melatonin. And very few people who are on melatonin supplements are doing that. So for example, when we produce in response to darkness, which is perceived when the eyes don't pick up blue light, right? So when the sun goes down below the horizon at sunset, there's no more blue wavelengths of light. That is a direct signal to my pineal gland to say, darkness has come, and it's going to start to rev up production of melatonin. And that pineal melatonin gets secreted into the bloodstream. And once it's secreted into the bloodstream at a high enough saturation, that is what I call the chemical signal of darkness. It is the signal that is being kind of projected out that they're circulating melatonin, and all the organ systems now say it is nighttime. This is where we need to switch into repair mode or active mode, depending. Because I also have a traditional Chinese medicine background. And if you look at the organ clock, there are some organs that are designed to actually be more active at night. For example, liver, right? That liver gallbladder. So, we have to view this as that chemical signal of darkness actually helps to inform all of our tissues as to just the time of night and then what their specific task is at night, which for most of them is repair. And so that pineal melatonin, that's important because it does get secreted into the bloodstream. And while our microbiome does make melatonin for us, if we take it just via the gut and we have that gut absorption, my long-term question, and it's not that it's good or bad, but my long-term question is that somehow creating a faulty signal? Because I really think the pineal gland does more than secrete melatonin. I honestly think it's a seat of our intuition, right? And we can strengthen, just a different type of knowing, if you will, by tending to it. And so I don't want my clients to think that I can stare at a screen, a blue lit screen until 11 o'clock at night and simply pop a melatonin pill and I'll be okay. So I want that optimum pineal melatonin production, but that's only 5% of the body's melatonin production throughout the course of a 24-hour cycle. And so it's very important because it helps us to fall asleep. When it peaks, you're also peaking other key repair hormones like human growth hormone, and you're triggering these repair cascades like apoptosis, like autophagy, which clears out damaged cellular debris and cellular parts. So we want this to elevate at night, but like I said, it is only 5% of the story when it comes to melatonin.
That's fascinating. So do you think that when someone takes the supplements, it suppresses the body's own natural production of melatonin in the pineal gland?
I don't know, because when studies were done, no studies are controlling for the light environment to the extent to which we can actually draw any conclusions. So there's tons, I love Russ Rader. He is a phenomenal melatonin researcher, and him teaming up with another optics researcher, Scott Zimmerman. I love the work that they are doing. But we hear things like melatonin production decreases with age. Well, none of these studies are controlling for light. And now all of a sudden, within the past 30 years at least, we're getting tons of LED lit living environments, especially at night. I know my grandparents were watching the 11 o'clock news, all throughout their life. So we're not controlling for it. So can we say that we can't make melatonin as we age, or is that just another signal of faulty lighting at night? So I don't know. I just don't know if it's going to downregulate anything. In my short-term experience with it, I have had clients who, through working with their physicians, they were taking high-dose melatonin for some pretty serious conditions. And they found a massive benefit to that high-dose melatonin supplementation.
Of course.
But when they stopped, when they stopped, it didn't impact their ability to then fall asleep naturally through our usual light hygiene techniques at night. So that's really the only data that I have at this point. It's just anecdotal evidence currently.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to know really, but of course what we're trying to do here through this podcast episode, we're trying to give people the tools, the natural tools that they can use in a way that they don't necessarily need to even spend any money to optimize their melatonin production. And I was thinking that if it did actually decrease the pineal's ability, let's say when you do take it, specifically that day or that night, if it decreases your ability to make that pineal melatonin, doesn't also the pineal gland need that melatonin locally as well? So I'm just thinking that maybe that's not getting the repair that it needs, if it's actually produced by the pineal gland and if it's somehow suppressed or something like that. So that's why I'm just thinking that there's all these things that we don't really know what's actually going on.
I agree. I love that take on it. And there's this is a completely different topic, but there's other potential substances in this pathway. So melatonin, this is a pathway, right? Where melatonin then can it break down and become something like DMT, which can help with the dreaming experience, that type of thing. But it ultimately breaks down into tryptophan. And then that tryptophan requires morning sunlight, that UVA light, to then become serotonin. And so it's a cycle. So anytime you put in something in the cycle, especially as a chemical, a full chemical that is not produced by the body, there's always questions. If I were to, like, my current line of thought is, if I wanted to support someone's pineal melatonin production, I would start at the level of tryptophan, because tryptophan is an amino acid that we would naturally be pulling in its amino acid form via the foods that we eat. And it might take a couple of days for that whole cycle and that whole pathway to kind of build in additional tryptophan to become serotonin, to become melatonin. But I think that that's a very viable way to support it that doesn't involve supplementing directly with melatonin.
Oh yeah, I can tell you that it absolutely works. You know, when you eat more tryptophan-rich foods. I remember in university, I used to eat 6 bananas a day. And by the time I got to the last 2 bananas, because I always used to eat bananas in 2s. So when I used to eat the last 2 bananas, I always used to fall asleep instantly. Like instantly. It doesn't matter what time of the day it was, I would just fall asleep. Even in the lecture rooms, you know, because they were super dim and they have a really bright projector, but the whole classroom was super dark. I would just fall asleep, you know, in class, and I couldn't understand why. And then I figured it out that every time I ate the bananas, I fell asleep. So I stopped eating the bananas, and then I wasn't falling asleep in the classroom. So, so I definitely know that it absolutely works, what you're saying.
Oh, I love that story. That's hilarious. That yeah, it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I didn't know anything back then. So for me, I just made the correlation that, you know, I ate this, so then this thing happened. So I stopped doing it, but then I realized, okay, it's useful maybe before bed. But going back to melatonin, how does it actually make us fall asleep? So for example, yes, it's produced in the pineal gland, it goes into the bloodstream. Could you explain to me the mechanism of what is the onset of sleep, do you think?
Sure. So there's 2 different things that I think need to line up correctly in order for the body to get the signal to fall asleep. One of them is adequate saturation of melatonin receptors, and the other one is adequate saturation of something called adenosine receptors. And so these are essentially receptors that we have. Adenosine, I'll talk specifically in the brain, but we've got receptors throughout the body. So if we have adequate melatonin docking to receptors, it's a signal. And I'm of the opinion that receptor docking doesn't necessarily need to be a physical thing. It could be more of a vibrational resonance.
A field.
But let's say you produce a field, exactly. So you produce adequate melatonin for this vibrational field to register as that melatonin is elevating, and it's elevated enough. So that's the chemical signal of darkness. We also have a chemical signal in the brain that is kind of telling us time of day that doesn't involve the blue light. The blue light is absolutely a mechanism. So we'll see that the blue light's missing, and that's when the melatonin is produced. But in the morning, we wake up with a low level of a certain chemical called adenosine. Essentially, it's like what ATP can break down into. So we have to start with a low level of adenosine. And then that adenosine just over time in a fairly linear fashion, it's like low when we wake up, builds up, builds up, builds up. And when its rise correlates with melatonin's rise, there's a critical cross point. And we literally cannot stay awake any longer. But nowadays, there's a lot of things that can interfere with that. First thing that can interfere with that is obviously artificial light at night. We're not going to get that melatonin to rise the way we need it to do. The other thing that can happen is adenosine. If adenosine, caffeine competes with the adenosine signal. And so if we've got too much caffeine in our system, then again, melatonin may be rising, but we're not going to get the correct rise of adenosine. And so we're not going to get that correct cross point. So those are 2 key factors, I think, these days that are really, really impairing our ability to fall asleep at a circadian friendly time, which is typically starting to feel tired, let's say around 14 hours or so after we wake up. And then, it's like, okay, this is wind down time. And then you get that critical threshold to fall asleep, to say you can get approximately 8 hours of sleep that night.
If there was one substance that could increase your energy levels, optimize mitochondrial function, boost ATP production, help to optimize your hormones, remineralize the body with ionic minerals, boost cognitive function, assist detoxification, and support your gut health via the microbiome, this substance is Shilajit, known as the destroyer of weakness. Shilajit is a herbomineral substance made from the decomposition of plants and bacteria, this process taking place over thousands of years. It is harvested from high altitude locations, primarily the Altai and Himalayan mountains. And what makes Shilajit Shilajit so unique is that it's made by Mother Nature herself. I call it nature's methylene blue. Not all Shilajit that you find on the market is created equally. This is why I only use and trust Mountain Drop Shilajit. They have an extremely high quality Shilajit product that has been rigorously tested for heavy metals and impurities. Grab yourself some Shilajit, the destroyer of weakness, today, and head over to mountaindrop.com. Use the promo code MobilityFitness at checkout for a nice discount as well.
Wow, this is mind-blowing stuff. I'm sure no one has ever heard about this before. Or I mean, some people will know it for sure, but it's really nice to hear it broken down like this, how the melatonin and the adenosine, they work together synergistically. And then I've heard it before that basically the reason we fall asleep is this sort of like this saturation of energy, right? It's not rather than the lack of energy like most people think, but it's more that the mitochondria get to this point where they're like, okay, we're like totally maxed out for the day. Let's go to bed.
Yeah, exactly. And that melatonin is building up, and that's an antioxidant. What's an antioxidant but something that can give additional energy or additional charge, right? It's this charge building molecule. And so we reach this critical threshold where we have adequate charge in the body, and the body says we can fall asleep and now we can repair because we have that redox, quote unquote, to be able to distribute to the tissues.
Okay, so that means the next important question is then, if your redox is low or if you don't have enough charge, that means you can't fall asleep easily, right?
Absolutely. Or absolutely likely if you're probably likely people that can't fall asleep, they're oftentimes on screens. Or what I found too is most people are not gathering charge, right, Andreas? We know that most people aren't going outside, getting the light on the skin, earthing, grounding, consuming water or foods that will help to replenish that charge. So those are all possibilities. But what also sometimes happens is that, we'll get someone who can fall asleep but not stay asleep, or we'll get someone who ignores the initial signal of fatigue. I get this all the time.
Oh, yes.
And this is this is an interesting one. So I get someone who essentially, oftentimes they'll start to do these redox type strategies, and then they'll say, yeah, but then my body wanted to fall asleep at like 7:30 and I just pushed through. And it's like, no, that's not pathological. That's a good thing. Your body is finally signaling that you're getting the adequate energy. And what happens over time is if we ignore that signal, I get clients whose bodies are physically tired, but mentally they're wired in that monkey mind brain. Because again, it's like they think that they can't fall asleep before 9 o'clock at night. They think it's like, oh, I can't possibly fall asleep before then. But their bodies are actually asking them to do just that so that they can finally get into those phases and have adequate energy and hormone signaling for deep tissue repair. I also liken it to babies. When I remember my first child, before I knew this stuff, right? My first child was not a great sleeper. And my thought was, well, I'm just going to keep him up longer, right? I'm just going to keep him up later. And then he'll obviously be so tired, he'll sleep better. That backfired completely. And what I recognized that what I was doing as I was controlling for my light environment better, as he was a little bit older, I started to see that, oh my gosh, I was ignoring that first sign of fatigue. And if I can catch him at that first sign of fatigue and put him to sleep then, gosh, it seems like the symphony of processes just syncs up and he falls into this deep, beautiful sleep. So there's a lot of modern day stuff that we're doing, I think, to mess with this just built-in sleep cycle and these built-in sleep pathways that we are blessed with, but we just ignore.
We'll definitely get into all of the sources that hamper or suppress our ability to make melatonin. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about its antioxidant properties, because we know that the melatonin is a super antioxidant. And how does that compare to vitamin C, for example, or other well-known antioxidants?
Put it this way, number one, I think the ultimate antioxidant in the body is actually charged water, exclusion zone water, because it is negatively charged and it has a positive charge to it. So it acts as the ultimate ability to pass electrons where they're needed, receive electrons, pass protons. So it's like the ultimate redox molecule. So I truly believe that we need adequate exclusion zone water to have a healthy cell and a healthy antioxidant environment inside of the cell. But melatonin also contributes in this pathway. And what I like about melatonin is, yes, it can do multiple things. Vitamin C really can just, it donates an electron and then it needs to be recycled, right? But with melatonin, you can donate an electron to calm a reactive oxygen cascade, but you can also use melatonin to recycle the glutathione pathway, which is another what people would consider key antioxidant pathway. Melatonin can dock as a signaling molecule and then initiate different repair cascades as well. So melatonin acts almost like in an adaptogenic fashion where it's not just donating an electron and then needs to be recycled. It essentially can contribute to all of the different repair pathways in the body, depending.
That all sounded incredible. Thank you so much for that. And so basically, like when we think about repair and regeneration, then like how is melatonin contributing to that? Like when we think about, because we know that repair and regeneration goes on a circadian rhythm, right? All our cells in our body are following this clock and this rhythm, and they need this rhythm in order to repair and regenerate. But is that because the rhythm is what helps the melatonin and that's what actually helps the repair and regeneration?
Okay, yeah, I think I know what you're saying. So what I do know is that we have multiple repair pathways in the body. So for example, there are certain repair genes that need the epigenetic signal of darkness before they are expressed. The gut, for example, has this gene pathway called clock and BMAL. It's a great one to talk about because people think, oh, my gut lining takes 3 weeks to repair. I need to do a 3-week elimination diet, like because that's how long it takes for the inflammation to go down. But my experience is that was done. That type of clinical investigation was done before without people controlling for their light exposure. When you control for light exposure, you turn on those repair genes in localized tissues, and the tissues can just essentially initiate this cascade of repair programs and heal within 24, 48, like up to maybe 3 days. So, wow. So we've got a lot of repair programs built into the body. Require that chemical signal of darkness to be initiated, which is that melatonin rise at night. The other thing that we get, though, during the day is naturally during the day, we create what's called metabolic damage, which I think it's a misnomer that reactive oxygen species are all bad. I think reactive oxygen species are signaling molecules, but we want the correct signal, and it signals through light. Like these are biophotons, right? These are light molecules that are being produced. And we sometimes will have a cell that's releasing a little bit of light molecules, and we want that light to signal to the DNA about what's going on with our mitochondria. We want that light to signal to the exterior of the cell to say, hey, this is what's happening, and a certain amount of light indicates natural, healthy metabolic function. But if that light show, those reactive oxygen species start popping off like the finale of a fireworks, show, that's when that can create excessive damage. But that's where melatonin is available to essentially then during the daytime, if we're producing it, which I don't think the majority of us are producing it adequately during the day or at night, frankly. But if we can produce it adequately during the day, we can start to calm those reactive oxygen species. Not enough that we suppress that light, because if we suppress that, we're suppressing communication. And that's where vitamin C, I think, has been guilty of. When we look at some of the studies on things like smokers taking higher doses of vitamin C or beta carotene, vitamin E, we don't want, if there's inflammation going on, we don't want to suppress it completely, because otherwise that's a tissue that's not going to get the signal that it actually needs repair, needs tending to. But instead, we want to just optimize that reactive oxygen species production. And that's what that's what melatonin produced by the mitochondria can do for us during the day inside of our cells. It stays localized inside of our cells.
So what you're saying really there is that the body's producing melatonin 24/7, or it should be producing 24/7 melatonin if we're living in alignment with nature. Is that correct?
It's very correct, because we need the darkness signal at night, and we'll produce that pineal melatonin that goes into the bloodstream. And during the day, we need adequate near-infrared exposure, which, as you know, is a wavelength range of light we could even get in the shade around greenery. And it penetrates the body deeply and stimulates the mitochondria to make its own version of melatonin that stays in the cell and cleans up that metabolic damage during the day. I liken it to like, the analogy that I always use is I'm running a daycare. And I could either wait till the very end of the day at night to clean up the toys and the crumbs and the clothes or, the shoes, whatever might be all around the place. Or I can tidy up all day long. And then at night, I can sweep through and do a deeper cleaning. And that's the analogy with the daytime melatonin. It's tidying up. It's allowing that biophoton communication to happen. It's allowing the mitochondria to remain healthy in terms of their metabolic function. But then if we get the adequate pineal melatonin at night, that's what can come in and run the deeper programs of autophagy, apoptosis, mitophagy, right? Which is how we can clear damaged mitochondria and replace them. So both of them, both versions of melatonin are equally important in my opinion. And both of them I think are inadequate these days in most people because we're not living in that signal of darkness or getting enough near infrared light during the day.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about it. The body is actually designed to do that, like the entire day, the cleaning process and the regeneration, like you talked about. And most people are not outside, so they're not getting that near infrared light. So now we're not repairing in the daytime, and we're creating a lot of oxidative stress due to that artificial blue light and maybe processed diet, bad breathing habits, lack of movement, all of that stuff, all the things on top. And then at night, we have the artificial sun, the artificial blue light indoors signaling to us that it's basically midday. And that's also lacking, again, the infrared light. And, it keeps us awake. So we do suppress our pineal melatonin production. So if you think about it, we're suppressing all of the body's best and natural healing regeneration abilities. Like we're doing everything possible to suppress the body's regeneration and healing abilities. No wonder you see people now these days who use a lot of tech. They look like they're aging rapidly. I mean, like you look at people who are super young, like obviously their posture sucks a lot and like that's hampering their biomechanics and their musculoskeletal system. But then when you look at their skin and their cognitive function and their ability to perform, like people don't look like people anymore. We're starting to look like aliens.
It's crazy. I think you're absolutely right. And a ton of it has to do with they're not connecting with the key sources of energy and information. And because of that, the body is degenerating at a lot faster rate. Now, interestingly, with this melatonin, again, going back to Russ Ryder, the melatonin researcher, he found that he's taken cells that are cancerous. Okay, so let's break this down, right? So you have mitochondria inside of a cell that are becoming dysfunctional because of the things you were talking about. It could be too much blue light, too much non-native EMFs. It could be a toxin exposure, glyphosate, right? And so you get mitochondria that are starting to make metabolic damage in too much reactive oxygen species. And we're not then under the correct lighting during the day to help to calm that damage. And so this damage goes out of control. And what happens is the mitochondria begin to no longer be able to be the energy producers of the cell. And the energy production switches to the outside of the cell, in the cytosol, in the fluid of the cell. And that's called a Warburg metabolism. And it's a very inefficient metabolism. It's a metabolism that has to hoard glucose to make very little ATP. And so, but that's what happens when a cell becomes dysfunctional to the extent, and it's not just cancer. This happens in various autoimmune conditions as well. It's just a hallmark that we've overwhelmed the mitochondria with some form of toxin, and we're not obviously giving the mitochondria what it needs to sustain healthy oxidative phosphorylation. And so then what he showed, though, is he's taken Warburg cells, so cells that are in this very unhealthy cancerous metabolism, and has given them the correct signal of melatonin, and they revert back to mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation. He called it, quote, the study title was something like part-time cancer. And he said, well, gosh, melatonin is so important that we can actually take cells that are in this unhealthy, really dysfunctional metabolism and bring them back into a healthy mitochondrial metabolism. And my question is, does it have to be part-time? Because he saw that during the nighttime, these cells were doing it. During the daytime, they were flipping back to cancerous. But as we know, now we're designed to make melatonin 24/7 in various different ways. So I have a feeling that we can do, if you were to repeat that study using the correct exposure of melatonin signaling at night and the correct exposure of near infrared light to make melatonin during the day, you could actually take those cells that were in that dysfunctional metabolism and revert them to fully healthy all the time because you're sustaining the appropriate melatonin.
Wow. Well, she just blew my mind. That was amazing. And so basically what I understood from what you just said there, that the cancerous cells are sort of like the backup mechanism for the body to produce energy for the body because the mitochondria are not functioning properly, they're not actually there to cause us like issues, because many times we think that everything that's happening to us is happening to us and not for us, right? But the body is always working for us and never against us. It's always doing it as an adaptation, right? It's trying to keep us alive, basically. So that just blew my mind. So it just helps us really understand what cancer actually is. It's just really like when the cells can't make the energy anymore, then there is this backup mechanism that there is involved in the body that is just trying to keep the show going until we create the right environment within the body for them to revert back to. And I didn't know that they could revert back to, healthy functioning cells and mitochondria. That's just amazing. That's incredible. So let's move on to our next topic now, because I know that we're running a little bit out of time. But so we covered then like all of the things that suppress melatonin. So that's very important for people to be aware. So now we talked a lot about it. We know its roles in the body and how important it actually is for our health, well-being, and cancer prevention and performance and recovery. So then we talked about the blue light being problematic. The artificial blue light in the day or in the night is just problematic all times of the day, really, because it's not native to our environment. We talked about the non-native electromagnetic fields, which is from the Wi-Fi routers, cell phones, microwaves, anything electronic these days. What other things do you think suppress melatonin production?
I think that there are things like toxins, anything that damages the mitochondria, frankly, has the potential to impair mitochondrial melatonin production. So this is where the talk of things like heavy metals and the chemicals and all those things comes into play as well. Interestingly, any stressor that we apply to our body, our mitochondria will make more melatonin for us. And so, like exercise, for example, that's going to create some micro damage, but that's healthy micro damage that if we have the correct healing environment, then we can repair it and become stronger, more explosive, whatever we're training. And so melatonin, it can be made also situationally based on what we're exposed to. But if you do something that damages the mitochondria, and you lack near infrared light, you are doing a double whammy when it comes to allowing your mitochondria to make that melatonin for you.
So training indoors under artificial blue light, basically.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's optimum for the human body. I train way less than I ever did before when I actually owned a blue lit gym and am young. I feel my muscles feel younger. I am still as strong, if not stronger. And that was like 15 years ago, right? I mean, so like I am in my mid 40s. I'm stronger than ever. I'm doing way less of that intense training that I thought that would benefit me at 5 o'clock in the morning, under artificial blue light. And I'm very strategic about how I train in all natural light. And I think I was just spinning my wheels essentially when it came to training that way.
I just did a recent interview with Jack Schroeder, if you know him, and he was basically saying...
yeah, Jack's great.
Yeah, he's awesome. He was basically saying how the hormetic response is too great when we're exposed to this artificial blue light, whether we're doing breath work indoors or training indoors. The problem is that we're already creating a hormetic response through these through these hormetic stressors, right? Like exercise, sauna, cold, like all of the things that we know are beneficial. If you survive it, you basically become stronger, right? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But then you also need like that recovery. Without the recovery, you don't become stronger. And melatonin is part of that recovery process, as you're mentioning. And that's helping up that cleaning up like all the time. And if we work out outside, for example, we can feel like we're not so smashed at the end of our workout, but then we're able to recover way quicker. I've witnessed that for myself. This entire summer, I've trained most of my workouts outdoors. Maybe only one of my workouts per week has been indoors. And I felt like an absolute massive difference. And now I'm really going to try and stick to it during the winter time as well. So that would lead us into like my next question that I have for you. How can we utilize winter to optimize our health? Because everyone knows that in the summertime, we need to be outside. We need to get the sunlight for the vitamin D. And now, obviously, we can't make as much vitamin D because the UVB is going down, the UVB intensity. And people are going to think that, oh, so if the vitamin D is decreasing that I can produce, that means I need to take vitamin D supplementation. right? And just keep on doing what I'm already doing, like I operate in the summertime. Are there some consequences to continuing to live this way? And why should we honor the cycles?
Yeah, I used to experience the consequences. I had seasonal affective disorder. I had low libido in the winter, just felt off, like just did not feel like, I mean, I isolated myself. I just didn't feel good. And I live in a very live in a very seasonal environment. We experience winter hard. We also experience summer hard, right? So there are definite extremes where I live. And what I was trying to do was I was under the assumption that I needed to maintain healthy vitamin D levels. Now that vitamin D, we have to come back and do a whole podcast just on vitamin D, because what we test as quote unquote vitamin D, what we test is just as quote unquote vitamin D is one metabolite just in the blood. 3 dozen metabolites of vitamin D that are both in the blood, in our cells, fat soluble versions, in water soluble versions. So we test one version of vitamin D and we make this assumption that, oh no, vitamin D is low. That means we have to supplement it. And it never made sense to me, because I was like, but I live in Michigan and there's literally no way for me to make adequate vitamin D from, let's say, mid-October through mid to the end of March. Like I literally can't make enough of it with sunlight exposure. Why would my body need to maintain high levels of vitamin D? It just didn't make sense. And then about 3 years ago, a phenomenal paper came out that said, oh, by the way, melatonin docks to the vitamin D receptor. And they showed this little Venn diagram, right, where it had vitamin D on one circle, melatonin the other, and the fact that they had completely overlapping functions in terms of what they can facilitate for gene expression to support inflammation, the immune system, tissue repair, right? And so I was like, oh my gosh, this was what I inherently knew, is that there was a different system our body was operating on when it came to the winter. And that is that if we maximize melatonin in the winter because we have more darkness, that's what our body is designed to do. We flip the switch to a melatonin-based signaling pathway. Whereas in the summer, we absolutely will use a more vitamin D-based signaling pathway. But it's why the studies that really do long-term high-dose vitamin D supplementation, in even quote-unquote normal dose, they were used to say, let's do 400 IU. Okay, let's do 2,000 IU. Okay, let's do 10,000 IU. Like you see it going up and up and up in terms of the dose of the vitamin D they're giving people, because at the lower doses, no benefit. Okay, no benefit, no benefit. And so, you know, even studies where they'll try to get someone's blood value up to a certain threshold using light, and then blood value up using supplementation. Only the people who got it up, or the animals, they were animal studies as well, that used the light were the ones that saw the health benefit. So it's not just about what is your blood vitamin D level. I think a lot of it is about what pathways are you stimulating, and are you stimulating it correctly in the summer versus the winter months. And when I switched to honoring melatonin, honoring the darkness, looking at it as an opportunity to have more of these melatonin repair pathways running, when I started recognizing that the cold actually is a healing and can stimulate other repair pathways in my body, it was a game changer for me. I was living winter as if I was a winter denier, right? I was like, oh yeah, it's cold, but I'm just going to stay warm. I'm going to keep it hot in the house. I'm going to turn on lights all over. And I was living winter like it was summer. I was eating lots of tropical fruits still. And when I changed that and I started to really honor the fact that we had darkness and cold and that these were gifts, it was a game changer for me. Like summer was my thriving season. Winter was my season. And now summer I thrive, winter I thrive. It's just so much fun to share this information with people.
Oh, it's so important for people to understand that they can enjoy like the beauty of every single season, right? And also to honor that, because there is something critically important that is meant to happen, I believe, in the wintertime, because I feel like the summer is very stimulating, very energizing to the body, and we sort of is very yang, right? And then the winter is very yin. It's more nurturing. We're meant to sleep naturally more. We're meant to have more darkness. We're meant to eat like more root kind of vegetables and stuff like that. Eat seasonally, for example. And there is this beauty found in nature if we live with the cycles. But if we don't do that, then everything is just kind of like the same, and our body just stays stuck in this stress state, especially if we never are in connection with nature. We're living under these artificial blue lights and doing all our life the same over and over and over, I believe is what is actually contributing to this accelerated aging, especially people doing that in the winter time. Is going to accelerate your aging way, way more, I fundamentally believe, compared to the summertime, because in the summertime, naturally, you have longer, days and shorter nights, and you have a way brighter lux. So you can kind of get away with, like, if you crack open a window and you still sit indoors. But when the winter comes, there is no mercy, because you need that melatonin, as Carrie is saying throughout this entire episode, what we talked about, how critically important it is for all of our biological functions, and the fact that it replaces the role of vitamin D in the winter time, and that we shouldn't be actually striving to keep our vitamin D levels up. Of course, we should strive to be in nature as much as possible and get the sunlight, but the UVB is naturally going to be lower. So we're not going to be making as much vitamin D anyway, depending, of course, where you're living on the planet. And yeah, so it's just so important that we actually honor the cycles. But you have this winter challenge going on. Do you want to tell the audience about that?
Sure. So, it took me a long time, let's say 35 years of my life struggling through winter before I started learning this from a different lens, how to embrace the darkness and make that melatonin, how to cold adapt. That doesn't, like, if you want to do an ice bath, by all means, I talk people through that, but it doesn't have to be that way. I've taught thousands of people how to cold adapt using things like face plunges or the gentle ambient air temperature as it shifts in your location. And if we can do that, we actually become we're less inflamed. We don't have to shiver to generate heat anymore. We are metabolically better able to burn fat as a fuel source, which we're designed to do in the winter. Most people associate winter with weight gain, and that's not the case at all. It's just when we just don't initiate these metabolic pathways that make us efficient at burning fat. And if we can burn that fat efficiently, we actually generate heat with it. And so I basically have a 19-day challenge that starts October 2nd, where I take people through 19 very short, let's say they're about 5 to 15 minute video lessons each day, to say, this is why winter is a gift if you live within the gifts that the season is giving you. And so like I said, we talk about the cold, the darkness, we talk about infrared energies, which we're not getting, like we're not living in by campfire anymore. So how could we get that infrared into our environments? What does it look like to maybe build in what I call strategic scarcity? Because during the winter months where I lived, I wouldn't have had access to all fruits and vegetables from all over the planet. And so just because I have access to it doesn't mean it's what my body is asking to consume. And so, I just basically take people through 19 days of reframing winter with the really practical strategies I've discovered by transforming my view of winter. And I'm just so excited to share it with people. It starts October 2nd. It's a 19-day, $19 challenge. And I just encourage as many people as possible to join it, because I've heard time and time again that it really, really is life-changing if you live in a place where you experience winter and hate winter.
Oh yeah, and I highly recommend it for people, because most people know how to work with the summer, right? And it's super easy. It's just so much more easy to be, in tune with the summertime, but it's the winter time where people need to really optimize, just like as we talked about. So I will make sure to put the link in the description below so people can find your challenge straight there. So thank you so much for this conversation, Carrie. I absolutely loved it, and I'm sure the audience is going to love it as well. And of course, we need to do more episodes, because, we didn't have enough time, and I felt like there was so many rabbit holes I wanted to go down. So we have to definitely do it again. Where can people connect with you and find you?
Sure. Thank you so much for this conversation first, Andreas. I always love chatting with you. You can go to Carrie B Wellness on Instagram or carriebwellness.com. I also have YouTube, Carrie B Wellness. So any of those places connect. I'd love to get to know people more and just help them as best as I can.
Awesome, Carrie. I look forward to doing it on the next one.
If you guys enjoy the topics and guests I bring on the show, I would really appreciate it if you left me a 5-star review on Spotify, and also subscribe to Fitness Wisdom Podcast on YouTube as well, as this helps to spread the knowledge and wisdom with the world. Until next time, this is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast.